Want to know why? Ask how. Howard the Humongous. Okay, let me tell you what we're doing here. This is a special episode of Howard the Humongous, of Want to Know Why? Ask How. I have a new book coming out April 15th. It's called Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me. It is my rock and roll memoirs. Now, why in the world would a science person have rock and roll memoirs? Because I got started in science at the age of 10 in microbiology and theoretical physics, and I accumulated my first scientific credentials when I was 12, when I built my first Boolean algebra machine and co-designed a computer that won some science awards and was tutored in outside-the-box science by the head of research and development for the Moog Valve Corporation, which built the valves, very specialized valves, for the Bell X-1 and the Bell X-2, the first plane to beat the sound barrier and the first plane to make it to the edge of space. Plus, remember, all of this is at the age of 12. I was taken over to the University of Buffalo to meet with the head of the graduate physics department. That's right, the graduate physics department. And I was 12. God knows how my mom landed this. Probably it was supposed to be a 5-minute courtesy meeting, because what head of a graduate physics department wants to spend any time whatsoever with a 12-year-old, for God's sakes? But the meeting lasted an hour because we were discussing absolutely the hottest topic of the day, Big Bang versus steady state theory of the universe and the interpretation of the Doppler shift. And when we came out of his office, this guy stood over me and said to my mom with his hand on my shoulder, "You don't have to stay for grad school for him. He'll get fellowships at any grad school he wants in theoretical physics." Okay, and then suddenly I realized at the age of 12 and 13 that I was an atheist, and which meant there are no gods in the heavens and no gods under the earth and no gods hanging around in the roof rafters of your home, like the spirits of ancient dead ancestors, your father, your mother, your grandfather, etc. And my parents tried to drag me to high holiday services. And I resisted. I held on to the door frame of their blue Fraser for all I was worth, and they were tugging at my socks. And while they were tugging at my socks, I realized there are gods in this picture. They're not under the earth. They're not in the heavens. Where are they? They're inside my parents. And if they are inside the passions that are making my parents shred my socks and tug at my ankles and try to drag their firstborn son up to a synagogue. Where the hell does that passion come from? Because if it's in them, it's in me. And I have spent the rest of my life not just dedicated to my original sciences, but going into as many sciences as I can possibly understand. I've now been published, or I have given lectures at scholarly conferences in 12 different scientific fields, from quantum physics and evolutionary biology to the evolution of culture, to governance of all things, and information science, and a lot of other sciences in between, psychology, neuroscience, etc. But one of the things that I have that I have followed up on with passion all of my life is, where are the gods inside of us? What are they? How do we explain them? How do we get to feel them? How do we get to feel the ecstasies that other people go into when they feel that they are a part of something infinitely higher than they are? Those ultimate ecstasies of all, which are, of all things, the forces of history. How do you both experience those things and come to be able to explain them? So I took a weird switch, a weird career switch, when I got out of undergraduate school. Magna cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa, and yes, I did have 4 graduate school fellowships in what is now called neuroscience. But I skipped over all of those and went into a field I knew nothing about. Absolutely nothing. I went into popular culture. And I ended up founding the biggest PR firm in the music industry and working with Michael Jackson, Prince. I've got a name stuck in there that doesn't belong. It's Michael Jackson, Prince, Bob Marley, Bette Midler, AC/DC, Aerosmith, Kiss, Queen, Run DMC, Billy Joel, Billy Idol, Paul Simon, Peter Gabriel, David Byrne, and a whole mess of others. Run DMC, ZZ Top, Cool in the Gang, Earth, Wind and Fire, Shaka Khan, etc. And in many cases, I helped make their careers. Where I didn't help make them, I helped engineer what allowed them to sustain. And the most important client in my life, the most important human encounter of my life, was my work with Michael Jackson. He was the most astonishing person I have ever met in my life, and hopefully I get that across to you in Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me, A Search for Soul in the Power Pits of Rock and Roll, the book that's coming out April 15th. So, to give you a taste of the book, I'm going to read you a little bit from the beginning, and then you can see if you want to go out and buy this thing. And if you do, write to me at howlbloom, HOWLBLOOM, at AOL.com, and tell me what you think of this book. Okay, here we go. We're diving into Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me, A Search for Soul in the Power Pits of Rock and Roll. It was just past midnight on June 25th, 2009, my birthday. I had left the cafe in Park Slope, Brooklyn, where I wrote my books, and I was on the 2-mile walk that loops me up to Prospect Park through the dark and starry meadow, then takes me back down the hill the 3 long blocks to my brownstone. 2 hours earlier, I had been hit with a gut-punching birthday present, the death of Michael Jackson. My body was still processing the loss. It was too much for my verbal mind to handle. For me, the permanence of the separation was savage. I had unfinished business with Michael. I had conversations I wanted to complete. More important, I had signed on with his brothers for a mission that I had not been able to accomplish. Deep in me, I still wanted to deliver on that commitment. What's more, because of the negative press about Michael's supposed sexual interest in children, I wondered if others were still as deeply attached to Michael Jackson as I was. Had others become disgusted and abandoned him? Had he been despised and forgotten? Was he a cultural has-been? The streets and sidewalks of Park Slope at 12:30 a.m. are normally empty, devoid of human beings, but that was not the case on this black night. Sitting on the very top stair of a brownstone stoop were 2 18-year-olds. The guy had long, dark, black, curly hair, and the girl had a short, blonde haircut and was wearing shorts. The male said something to me as I passed. I was listening to a book on my Kindle and couldn't make it out. I ignored it and walked a few hundred feet down farther down the sidewalk. Then I turned around, walked back, took off my headphones, and asked him to repeat it. He said, "Michael Jackson is dead." I asked him why he said that to me. I wondered if he knew me from the tea lounge, the cafe where I wrote in those days, or from the streets of Park Slope, and if he knew my Michael Jackson connection. No, he didn't. He was announcing that Michael Jackson was dead loudly and with a strange urgency, a strange sense of command to everyone he saw. He wanted no one to ignore it. He was particularly emphatic about making sure that no one over the age of 25 pass it by or dismiss it. Michael Jackson's death, he felt, was a loss to all of us, whether we realized it or not, and he was afraid that those over 25 would fail to recognize that one of the beating hearts of our culture had just stopped. A greatness had just died. He was determined that no one forget Michael Jackson, that no one fail to realize that a piece of flesh had just been ripped from the body of mankind. So, no, Michael Jackson was not a has-been. Far from it. Now, how did I get involved with Michael Jackson and his brothers? It was the fall of 1983, and the Jacksons were planning to go on the road for their victory tour. They were getting the whole family together for this 55-city extravaganza, including their dad, who had originally engineered the rise and fall of the Jackson 5 to the top of the charts in 1969 and in the 1970s. This would be their first tour as a family since 1981, the first since Michael's career had exploded in a way that no one had seen since Elvis Presley and the Beatles. I was a science nerd in a field I'd initially known nothing about, popular music. But 6 years into my scientific expedition into pop, 5 years into my hunt for soul in the power pits of rock and roll, I'd founded and headed what had become the biggest publicity firm in the music industry. The manager that Tito, Marlon, Jackie, and Randy Jackson had hired for the Victory Tour called me over and over again for 4 months, asking me to work with the Jacksons. I said no, over and over again. At this point, I'd helped Amnesty International establish itself in North America. I'd worked with Simon and Garfunkel when they'd reunited for an audience of 400,000 people in a free concert in Central Park. Then my staff had handled Simon and Garfunkel's national reunion tour. I had done Queen's massive tour of 120,000-seat soccer stadiums in South America, and I'd been working since 1981 with a brilliant manager, Bob Cavallo, to build the career of an unknown Minneapolis 22-year-old named Prince. I liked to do crusades. I liked to fight for truths that others didn't see. I didn't like to work on sure things. And in 1983, the Jacksons were a sure thing. Michael had just sold roughly 32 million copies of just one album, Thriller. That was more than 3 times as many as the previous record holder, Peter Frampton. I didn't feel the Jacksons needed me. Or as I kept explaining to their manager, if you hired a talking dog to say Michael Jackson's name on the phone, you'd get coverage from any magazine editor or TV producer you wanted. So I kept turning the Jacksons down. Then, in a phone conversation, their manager cornered me. The Jacksons were coming into New York City and wanted to meet with me, despite my no's. Now look, I hadn't grown up among other human beings. I'd grown up in a bedroom stocked with guinea pigs, guppies, and laboratory rats. So I didn't know the rules of politeness. But I'd learned a few human norms from observation. One was the idea that if you're going to say no to someone, at least you owe them the decency to say it to their face. So when the Jacksons' manager asked me to meet with Michael's brothers at the Helmsley Palace Hotel in Manhattan, just a subway ride away from my Brooklyn brownstone, I was forced to say yes, even though the meeting was at midnight on a Saturday night, and Saturday and Sunday were my most precious working days of the week, the only days when the phone didn't ring and when I could go over every detail of every campaign, assemble an overview, and determine what my staff, the biggest PR staff in the music industry at the time, needed to do during the coming week. On weekends, I worked from 9 a.m. until I dropped. A midnight interruption was really going to hurt. But Saturday, 2 minutes before midnight, I stepped out of a Helmsley Palace Hotel elevator on a top floor, walked down the richly carpeted corridor, knocked on the correct white, elegantly gilded door, and everything changed. It changed when the door opened a mere inch. Why? I saw 4 men sitting up against a wall in a suite they'd rented for meetings only. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. There was an ad for a cassette tape company way back then that showed a man with long hair sitting in a big stuffed easy chair. His hair was blown straight back, and he was plastered up against the back of the seat as if he were in a hurricane, and the wind was blasting him with the force of a flying brick. This brutal wind supposedly represented the power of the music, recorded on the sponsor's tape. That was exactly how Marlon, Tito, Randy, and Jackie Jackson looked, plastered up against the wall by an unknown force, a dark force. But there was more. Something in the Jacksons' body language said that these were 4 of the most decent people you'd ever met in your life, and that they were in trouble. They didn't know what that trouble was. I didn't know what it was. But I did know this. Here was a challenge. There was a wrong to be righted, a wrong all of us could feel, but none of us could name. I said yes. By 2 a.m., the brothers crowded around me, each handing me his private phone number and a scrap of paper. "You start," said Randy Jackson, "at 10:30 tomorrow morning, Sunday." That's it. That's the opening of Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me, A Search for Soul in the Power Pits of Rock and Roll, which you can pre-order online on Amazon, on bookstore.com, and on Barnes & Noble. And if you read it, let me know what you think. This is Howard Bloom, speaking to you from the future. It's your job and my job to make. Or, want to know why? Ask how. And now for the stupid, sleazy, slimy little off button, which I failed to push to turn things on when I recorded my YouTube episode last night. That's how clumsy I am. That's how sneaky this button is. I think I found it.